Picture this. You're 7 years old, huddled in the corner of a creaking wooden wagon that smells of unwashed bodies and fear. The air is thick with the metallic scent of blood from the last village raid, and beside you, your 9-year-old brother, Mikhail, clutches your hands so tightly that your fingers have gone numb. It's the year 1650 AD, and through the gaps in the wagon's planks, you catch glimpses of your burning village in the distance, the smoke rising like a dark prayer against the crimson sunset. Your name is Eleni, and in 3 days you will undergo a procedure so horrifying, so incomprehensible, that it will transform you into something that exists in the shadowed margins of gender itself. You will become one of history's most forbidden secrets, a female eunuch of the Ottoman imperial harem. What they're about to do to you and your brother will ensure you can never speak of it, never escape it, and never, ever be the same again. Before diving into these forgotten stories of survival and suffering, if you enjoy learning about the hidden truths of history, consider hitting that like button and subscribing for more content like this. And please comment below to let me know where you're listening from. I find it incredible that we're exploring these ancient stories together from different parts of the world, connected across time and space by our shared curiosity about the past. The memory of that morning still burns behind your eyelids whenever you close them. You were feeding the chickens in your family's small courtyard in a Greek village on the Aegean coast when you heard the screams. The Ottoman raiders, locally called devshirme collectors, had descended on your village like locusts. But these weren't the usual tax collectors or military recruiters taking boys for the Janissary Corps. These men wore the distinctive silk sashes of the imperial palace, and they were looking for something specific, something rare. Your mother had pushed you and Mikhail into the root cellar, her hands trembling as she placed a finger to her lips. "Not a sound," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Not even a breath." But Mikhail, brave, foolish Mikhail, had peeked through the slats when he heard our father's shouts. The raiders found you within minutes, their experienced eyes scanning every hiding place with practiced efficiency. They pulled you both out into the harsh sunlight. A tall man with a face like carved stone examined you with the cold assessment of someone inspecting livestock. He lifted your chin with fingers that smelled of rosewater and tobacco, turned your face from side to side, and then did the same to Mikhail. You didn't understand the rapid Turkish he spoke to his companion, but you understood the nod, the gesture, the way they bound your wrists with silk rope that was soft enough not to leave marks, but strong enough to make escape impossible. Your mother's wails followed you as they loaded you onto the wagon. 17 other children were already inside, their eyes hollow with shock. Most were boys destined for various palace services, but scattered among them were a handful of girls, and you noticed something strange. They all looked similar. Fair-skinned, with delicate features, small-boned, almost ethereal. You didn't know it then, but you and these girls had been selected for a purpose so specific, so secret, that even within the vast machinery of the Ottoman Empire, only a select few knew the truth. The wagon journey to Constantinople took 11 days. 11 days of consuming hunger, of thirst that turned your tongue to leather, of nights so cold that you and Mikhail pressed together for warmth while the other children whimpered in the darkness. The raiders fed you just enough to keep you alive, but weak enough that escape became unthinkable. Twice daily, they gave you a bitter tea that made your head swim and your limbs feel heavy. On the 5th night, one of the older girls, perhaps 13, whispered to you in broken Greek. Her name was Sophia, and she'd been captured 3 weeks earlier from a village near Thessaloniki. "They're taking us to the palace," she said, her voice barely audible over the creaking wheels. "But not all of us will serve in the same way. Some of the boys, the beautiful ones, they do something to them. My cousin was taken 2 years ago," she said. Sophia's voice cracked. "She said they cut them, to make them safe for the harem, to make them something that won't." Mikhail squeezed your hand tighter in the darkness. At 9 years old, he didn't fully understand what Sophia meant, but you could feel his fear pulsing through his palm into yours. You tried to speak, to offer comfort, but the bitter tea had stolen your voice, leaving only a dry rasp. You didn't know it then, huddled in that wagon with your brother's trembling hand in yours, but in 3 days you would be strapped to a marble table in a chamber beneath the Topkapı palace. You didn't know that the screams you would hear echoing through stone corridors would be your own, or that the last thing you would see before the burning agony consumed you would be Mikhail's face, white with terror, as they held him down on an identical table beside you. You didn't know that the person you were, the girl named Eleni, who fed chickens and helped her mother bake bread, would die in that underground chamber. And something else, something neither fully female nor granted the mercy of complete transformation, would emerge in her place. Constantinople rose before you like a fever dream of golden domes and soaring minarets. The wagon entered through a side gate, deliberately avoiding the grand entrances where curious eyes might see. You were taken to a courtyard surrounded by high walls, where eunuchs in elaborate robes sorted the captured children like merchants dividing goods at a market. A chief white eunuch, his face powder pale and his robes shimmering with silver thread, walked slowly down the line. His eyes, dark and knowing, lingered on you and 3 other girls. He spoke in Turkish to a scribe, who made marks on parchment. Then he gestured to Mikhail and 2 other young boys. Your heart, which had been hammering against your ribs like a trapped bird, suddenly went cold. They separated you into 2 groups. Most of the children were led away toward different sections of the vast palace complex. But you, Mikhail, the 3 other girls, and the 2 boys were taken in a different direction entirely. Down. Always down. Through corridors that grew progressively darker, cooler, damper. The smell changed from incense and rosewater to something earthier, more primal. Stone and water and something else underneath, something your child's mind couldn't quite identify, but your body recognized with primitive terror. The chamber they brought you to exists in no official palace records. It was located 3 levels beneath the harem quarters, accessible only through a series of locked doors that required 7 different keys. The room was surprisingly clean, almost clinical, with white marble tables arranged in precise rows. Braziers burned in the corners, heating implements you couldn't identify. The air was thick with herbs, medicinal and cloying, mixed with something sharper underneath. A woman waited there, not a servant, not a concubine, but something else entirely. She wore the robes of a palace physician, but her face was covered except for her eyes. Those eyes had seen things, done things that had long ago burned away any resemblance to normal human compassion. Beside her stood 2 other figures, their gender impossible to determine beneath shapeless robes. The chief white eunuch spoke to the woman in a language you didn't recognize, not Turkish, not Greek, something older. She nodded, her eyes moving over you and the other children with the same cold assessment as the raiders who had taken you. The procedure will begin at sunset, she said finally, in Greek accented with something Eastern. You will drink this. She held up a clay cup filled with dark liquid. It will make you sleep, but you will still feel. This is necessary. The pain teaches the body to forget what it was. You must forget, or you will go mad. Mikhail began to cry then, tears streaming silently down his dirty face. You wanted to comfort him, but your own tears were falling, and your throat had closed around words that would never come. They separated you from Mikhail, but you could hear him sobbing in the next chamber. The robed figures stripped you efficiently, without gentleness but without particular cruelty either. They washed you in water so cold it stole your breath, scrubbing your skin until it burned. Then they dressed you in a simple white shift that reminded you horribly of burial shrouds you'd seen in your village. The physician woman examined you with hands that were surprisingly gentle but utterly impersonal. She pressed on your abdomen, looked into your mouth and eyes, felt the bones of your hips. Good structure, she murmured to herself in Turkish. She'll survive it. Maybe. Maybe, one of the robed figures asked. 1 in 4 doesn't, the physician said matter-of-factly. The girls less often than the boys, but still. The body fights. Sometimes the body wins and they bleed out. Sometimes infection takes them in the days after. Sometimes their minds break and they have to be disposed of. Your child's mind couldn't fully process these words, but your body understood. Every instinct screamed to run, to fight, to escape. But the bitter tea they'd been feeding you had left you weak, and the robed figures held you with surprising strength as they led you back to the main chamber. Mikhail was already strapped to one of the marble tables, his small body dwarfed by the cold stone. He was still crying, but quietly now, a hopeless sound that was somehow worse than screaming. They placed you on the table next to his, close enough that if you both stretched your hands out, your fingers could just touch. The physician woman stood between your tables, her eyes visible above her veil, flat and emotionless. "The Sultan's harem requires absolute security," she said, as if lecturing students. "Male eunuchs guard the outer chambers, but they cannot enter the private quarters. Female servants cannot be trusted not to carry messages, not to form attachments, not to become pregnant and claim royal paternity. You will be something else, something that can move freely because you threaten nothing, something that can be trusted because you can never be what you were meant to be." She nodded to her assistants. They brought the cups of dark liquid, held your heads, forced you to drink. The taste was bitter beyond bearing, like poison mixed with honey, and within moments your limbs went heavy, your vision blurred at the edges. But you didn't lose consciousness. That was the horror of it. You felt everything. The first cut was fire, pure, white-hot fire that started at your most intimate place and spread through your small body like lightning. Your back arched against the restraints, and the scream that tore from your throat was an animal sound, primal and broken. Beside you, Mikhail's scream joined yours, a harmony of agony that echoed off the stone walls. The physician worked with terrible efficiency. You felt the pulling, the cutting, the cauterizing heat that smelled of burning flesh and herbs. Your body bucked against the restraints, but the robed figures held you down with practiced strength. Time lost all meaning. There was only pain, wave after wave, each one cresting higher than the last, until you thought, surely, surely your heart must stop, your mind must break, something must give. Through your tears, through the red haze of agony, you could see them working on Mikhail. His face was twisted in suffering, his small body convulsing against the restraints. Your fingers found his, that last connection to who you had been, what you had been. You held on as they unmade you both, piece by piece, cut by cut. You woke in darkness, your body a constellation of pain. You were lying on a narrow cot in a small cell, clean bandages wrapped around your lower body. The bandages were already seeping, dark stains spreading across the white cloth. Every breath hurt. Every heartbeat sent fresh waves of agony through your damaged body. A face appeared above you, one of the robed figures from the chamber. Up close, you could see her face was heavily scarred, her expression neutral. She held a cup to your lips. "Drink," she said in Greek. "For the pain and infection. You must drink every hour or you'll die." "Mikhail," you whispered, your voice raw from screaming. "My brother." "He lives," she said, "in the next cell. You won't see him for 3 months until you've both healed, if you heal." What did you do to us?" Her scarred face didn't change expression. "We made you safe," she said. "Safe to serve in the harem, safe to never threaten the Sultan's line, safe to never be fully human again." The next 3 months existed in a haze of fever, pain, and drugs. The infection came as the physician had warned it might. Your small body burned with heat, and you drifted in and out of delirium. In your fever dreams, you were back in your village, feeding the chickens, your body whole and unharmed. But you always woke to the reality of the narrow cell, the constant pain, the slow horror of discovering what they had taken from you. The scarred woman, whose name you learned was Aisha, tended to you with neither kindness nor cruelty. She changed your bandages, forced medicine down your throat when you resisted, held a basin when you vomited from the drugs and infection. She had been where you were now, you realized slowly. She was one of them, one of the female eunuchs who served in the deepest, most secret parts of the harem. "How many of us are there?" you asked her one day when the pain had receded enough to allow coherent thought. "In the entire palace? Perhaps 50. We're rare, difficult to create, expensive to maintain. 1 in 4 dies in the procedure, another 1 in 4 dies in the recovery. Of those who survive, half go mad within the first year. The rest," she shrugged, "the rest become what I am, what you will be. What happened to you?" "I was 10 when they took me. From a village in Georgia. They needed a new female eunuch because the last one had hanged herself in the linen room. That was 30 years ago." Her scarred face betrayed no emotion, but her hands, as she changed your bandages, trembled slightly. I've served 3 sultans. I've seen things that would drive you mad if I described them. And I will serve until I die, because there is nothing else, nowhere else, no one else who would have me now. When they finally allowed you to see Mikhail, you almost didn't recognize him. The bright, brave boy who had clutched your hand in the wagon had been replaced by a hollow-eyed ghost. He moved carefully, as if his body might shatter, and when he saw you, he began to cry silently, tears streaming down his thin face. You held each other in the small visiting chamber, your scarred bodies pressed together, 2 broken pieces of what you had been. No words were adequate. What could you say to someone who had suffered the same violation, the same theft of self? Do you remember the chickens? Mikhail whispered finally. How you used to name them all and get upset when Mother chose one for dinner. I remember, you said, and the memory was like a knife. That girl who named chickens was dead. They had killed her on a marble table in a chamber beneath the palace. I don't want to forget, Mikhail said. I don't want to forget who we were. But Aisha, standing guard by the door, shook her head. Forgetting is mercy, she said. Remembering is madness. You'll learn. The training began as soon as you could walk without bleeding through your bandages. A chief female eunuch named Safiye took charge of your education. She was older than Aisha, perhaps 50, her face like wrinkled parchment, her eyes sharp as glass. You will learn Ottoman Turkish, Persian, and Arabic, she announced on your first day of lessons. You will learn to read and write in all 3 languages. You will learn the protocols of the harem, the hierarchies, the unspoken rules that govern every interaction. You will learn to move silently, to see everything while appearing to notice nothing, to hear secrets and forget them instantly. You will learn to be invisible. The lessons were brutal. Mistakes were punished with beatings, with deprivation of food, with hours spent kneeling on rice in meditation chambers. You and Mikhail learned together, along with 2 other surviving female eunuchs from your group. The 3rd girl had died of infection. The 2 boys besides Mikhail had both gone mad, one throwing himself from a window, the other simply refusing to eat drink until he faded away. But you learned. Your child's mind, desperate for anything to focus on besides the constant phantom pain from your mutilation, absorbed the languages, the protocols, the endless rules. You learned that the harem was a world unto itself, with Byzantine politics more complex than any royal court. The Sultan's mother, the Valid Sultan, ruled it like an empire within an empire. The favorites, the concubines hoping to bear sons, navigated treacherous waters where one misstep meant exile or death. And through it all, silent and invisible, moved the female eunuchs. Your first assignment came 6 months after your transformation. You were 9 years old, still carrying the pain of what had been done to you, still waking at night from dreams where you were whole again. Safiye brought you to a small chamber where a woman sat weeping, her face swollen from crying. This is Hurrem, Safiye said in Turkish. She was the Sultan's favorite until last month. Now she's been replaced by a younger woman. Tomorrow she will be sent away to a distant mansion, but tonight she's writing letters. Your job is to ensure none of those letters leave this room. You stood by the door as Hurrem wrote frantically, her tears spotting the parchment. She wrote to her family, to other concubines, to influential members of the court, begging for intervention, for mercy, for help. And as she finished each letter, you took them from her, one by one, and fed them to the brazier burning in the corner. Please, she begged you in Turkish, then in broken Greek. Please, you're just a child. Have mercy, just one letter. Let me send just one. But you had learned the first lesson well. There was no mercy here. You were not a child. You were not fully anything anymore. You were a tool, and tools don't have compassion. So you burned her letters one by one and watched the hope die in her eyes. That night, you vomited until there was nothing left in your stomach. Aisha found you in the bathing room, shaking and sobbing. She held you with awkward gentleness, the only tenderness you'd known in months. It doesn't get easier, she said quietly, but you learn to carry it. You learn to put the guilt in a box and lock it away. Otherwise, you become like the ones who throw themselves from windows. The years passed in a blur of service and survival. You grew from a traumatized child into a traumatized adolescent, your body developing in strange ways around the damage they had done. You never menstruated. never developed in the ways the other girls in the harem did. You were frozen in a permanent prepubescence, your body as confused about what it was supposed to be as your mind. Mikhail serving in the male quarters you saw rarely. When you did manage stolen moments together, you spoke in the Greek of your childhood, clinging to that last piece of identity. He told you of the boys he guarded, the young princes and their tutors. You told him of the women you served, their intrigues and desperate attempts to win the Sultan's favor. Sometimes, Mikhail confessed once, I try to remember what it felt like, before, to be whole, but I can't. It's like trying to remember a dream. I know it happened, but the feeling is gone. You understood. Your own memories of childhood, of a body that had belonged to you, had faded like ink in sunlight. What remained was the constant phantom sensation of something missing, an absence that could never be filled. You were 12 years old when you first entered the Sultan's private chambers. Sultan Ibrahim, known to history as Ibrahim the Mad, ruled the Ottoman Empire with increasing erratic cruelty. You were assigned to serve his favorite concubine, Kusum. But on your third day, the Sultan himself noticed you. You, he said in Turkish, his eyes focusing on you with an intensity that made your skin crawl. How old are you? 12, Your Majesty, you whispered, keeping your eyes lowered as protocol demanded. And you're one of the female ones, aren't you? The special servants. He circled you slowly, like a predator examining prey. I've heard about you. My mother says you're useful because you can go anywhere, see anything, and threaten nothing. Is that true? I live only to serve, Your Majesty. He laughed, a sound without humor. Everyone says that, but you mean it, don't you? Because you have no choice. They took your choice away when they cut you. Tell me, do you hate them for it? The physicians, the ones who made you? The question was a trap. Any answer could be dangerous. I am what the palace requires me to be, you said carefully. Diplomatic. They trained you well. He lost interest suddenly, turning back to Kusum. But his question haunted you. Did you hate them? You'd never allowed yourself to fully examine that question. Hate required energy, required a sense of self that they had tried to cut out of you along with your organs. But late at night, when phantom pains woke you, when you remembered your mother's face, when you thought of the girl who had fed chickens and named them all, yes. The hate was there, buried deep, a coal of rage that never quite extinguished. You were 15 when you found Mikhail in the linen room, a rope in his hands. He was staring at the ceiling beams with an expression of such profound longing that you knew immediately what he was planning. Don't, you said, closing the door behind you. Why not? He asked. Give me one reason why I shouldn't. One reason why existing like this is better than not existing at all. You wanted to tell him that it would get better, that the pain would fade, that you would find peace, but you'd learned not to lie. Because I need you, you said instead. Because you're the only person left who remembers Eleni and Mikhail, the chickens, the village, who we were before. If you die, those people die completely. I can't carry them alone. He dropped the rope, and you held each other and cried as you hadn't allowed yourselves to cry in years. Two broken pieces of the same shattered whole, clinging to each other against the darkness. You were 18 when the harem revolt happened. A group of concubines, desperate and enraged at their captivity, planned to poison the Sultan's food and escape in the chaos. You discovered their plot by accident, overhearing a whispered conversation in the bathing chambers. Protocol demanded you report it immediately. The rules were absolute, loyalty to the Sultan and the Valid above all else. But you looked at these women, trapped just as you were trapped, desperate for the freedom you would never have, and something inside you broke. You told them you knew. You told them their plan would fail because the Sultan had food tasters, because the palace guards were too numerous, because escape from Topkapı was impossible. You told them they would die for their attempt, horribly and publicly, as examples to others. And then you told them a different way. You couldn't give them freedom, but you could give them mercy. You told them about a poison, one used by the palace physicians, that caused sleep followed by a peaceful death. You told them where it was kept. You told them how much to use. That night, 7 women died in their sleep. The investigation was cursory. Concubines sometimes killed themselves. It was tragic, but not uncommon. The alternative, what would have happened if their rebellion had been discovered, would have been far worse. Safiye looked at you with knowing eyes after the investigation concluded. You helped them, she said. Not a question. I don't know what you mean, you said, your face expressionless. Yes, you do. And I'm going to pretend I don't know because what you did was mercy. We're not supposed to feel mercy, but sometimes we remember we were human once, even if we can barely recall what that felt like. You served for 30 years in total. 3 decades in the harem, watching sultans rise and fall, watching women arrive full of hope and leave broken or dead. You became what Aisha had been, what Safiye was, a ghost in the machine, neither male nor female, neither slave nor free, neither living nor quite dead. You taught new female eunuchs, children broken as you had been broken, trying to give them the tools to survive while hating yourself for perpetuating the cycle. You held dying concubines, delivered their messages to families who had forgotten them, burned evidence of plots and affairs and indiscretions. You became invisible as they had trained you to be. Mikhail died when you were 33, an infection, simple and quick. You weren't allowed to attend his funeral, such as it was. They buried him in an unmarked grave in the palace cemetery, one more forgotten servant who had given their life, their identity, their very humanity to the empire's service. With his death, the last person who remembered Eleni and Mikhail was gone. You were alone with ghosts that only you could see, memories of a life that felt increasingly unreal. Had there really been a village, chickens with names, a mother who baked bread, or had you been born in this palace in these shadows already broken and hollow? You were 52 years old when the Topkapı palace finally released you, not from kindness, but from obsolescence. The harem system was changing, modernizing. Female eunuchs were deemed unnecessary, a relic of a more barbaric time. They gave you a small pension, a room in a distant part of the city, and dismissed you with less ceremony than they would use to dispose of old furniture. You stood in the street outside the palace walls for the first time in 45 years, free and utterly lost. The city had changed beyond recognition. The world had moved on without you. You had no family, no friends, no identity outside the palace. You were neither man nor woman, neither Ottoman nor Greek, neither young nor permitted the dignity of normal aging. Sometimes, on quiet evenings in your small room, you try to remember the girl you were. 7 years old, feeding chickens, happy in that unconscious way children are happy before they learn the world can break them. But that girl is dead, murdered on a marble table beneath a palace, and you are what remains. You survive, because that's what you learned to do. You wake each morning, though you're not sure why. You eat, sleep, continue the mechanical processes of existing, though existence feels increasingly pointless. You are a ghost haunting your own life, a footnote in a history that never bothered to write your name. And in the deepest, darkest hours of the night, when the phantom pains are worst, when the memories of the cutting and the screaming are most vivid, you wonder, which would have been kinder? To have died in that chamber alongside the others who didn't survive? Or to have lived like this, broken and hollow, a shell that once contained a human soul? The practice of creating female eunuchs in the Ottoman palace was one of history's most closely guarded secrets. Unlike the relatively well-documented tradition of male eunuchs, female eunuchs existed in the shadows of the shadows, their very existence denied by official records. What we know comes from scattered accounts, whispered stories, and the occasional brave historian who dared to investigate the darkest corners of palace life. The procedure itself varied, but typically involved the removal or destruction of external genitalia and sometimes internal organs, leaving the victims in a state of permanent physical and psychological trauma. The mortality rate was staggeringly high. Of those who survived, many suffered chronic infections, pain, and mental health crises. These women and girls served in the most intimate parts of the harem precisely because their mutilation made them safe. They could not become pregnant, could not threaten the succession, could not be seduced or seduce others. They were human tools, their bodies modified to serve a function, their suffering deemed acceptable collateral damage in the maintenance of imperial power. The last confirmed female eunuchs in the Ottoman palace disappeared from records in the early 1800s as the practice was quietly abandoned. What happened to them remains unknown. Like so much of their existence, they faded into silence, their stories untold, their suffering unacknowledged, their very humanity erased by an empire that used them and discarded them without record or remembrance. This is their story. This is how absolute power can transform human beings into tools, can sanctify suffering, can convince itself that any horror is justified in the service of stability and tradition. This is what empires do when they value control above humanity. Remember them. Remember Eleni and Mikhail, the chickens, the village, the children who were destroyed to create something that should never have existed. Remember that behind every grand palace, every glorious empire, every magnificent history, lie the bodies of the forgotten, the broken, the sacrificed. Remember and refuse to let their suffering be forgotten again. If you found this story powerful, please engage below. Share your thoughts, your location, your reflections on these hidden histories. Let's ensure that the voices of the forgotten continue to echo, that their pain is not rendered meaningless by our silence.